My name is Rich Schmidt. I'm here with Dennis and Marlene Grant at Parrett Mountain Cellars. It's May 20th, 2021. Thank you both so much for joining us today. First question to get us started is why wine?
That's a great question. Thank you guys for being here. Marlene and I both enjoy wine. We enjoyed the Pinot Noir in the area, and in the 80s, late 80s, when we started doing some wine touring out here and visiting some of the wineries, we really enjoyed all of the Pinot Noir. So our first introduction to the Yamhill County, living in Newburg and the area, was the Pinot Noirs all around the Red Hills and the area. And from there we just kind of continued to enjoy it until maybe 2010, when we talked about how much we enjoyed big reds. And we noticed that there weren't a lot of big reds in the area, and thought maybe there was an opportunity for us to learn about wine, and that's how we got into winemaking.
Tell me about we'll come back to that in a second, actually. Tell me about your backgrounds before wine. So what were you doing before getting into the wine business?
I've always been in sales and marketing many, many years.
My background's as an engineer. I grew up in Northern California in Sonoma County, wine country, and ended up doing some engineering down there prior to moving up here. It included some winery design back in the late 70s, early 80s. But up here it's all been high-tech, the majority of it. High-tech design of facilities for chip manufacturers all around the world.
Interesting. Winery design in the 1970s in California. It must have been interesting. What was that like?
That was fantastic. Yeah, it was a huge amount of growth, and my contribution to it was as a drafter while I was going to school and getting a degree in mechanical engineering, and then hired on after at college for a little over a year to do some design. And yeah, it was very interesting to see the different people who were building wineries in the area down there, and all the different types of wineries that were being built. Mostly big reds and Chardonnays, and yeah.
And how did the two of you meet?
We met in a company bowling league. Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yes, he was a friend of an employee that worked for me. And that's kind of how we met.
Yeah.
And that was
Bowling.
in California?
No, that was in Beaverton.
Beaverton,
Yeah.
okay.
Yep, almost 34 years ago.
Yeah.
And so what brought you to this area? What brought you to the Newburg area and kind of started your discovery of Pinot Noir?
Well, we lived in Lake Oswego after we got married, and wanted property. Started looking out in this area, and looking for 15-20 acres. We ended up finding this 11-acre parcel in 1992, and built our home, and that's kind of how we got out in this area. There weren't a lot of houses on the Parrett Mountain Hill when we started here, so.
Yeah, hard to believe we've been here 30 years.
Yeah, 30 years on this property.
Gravel road, all of that kind of stuff.
And not a lot of wineries, I imagine, around at that point yet.
Not the small ones anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, it's changed quite a bit. The amount of vineyards, we have a view now looking across at Chehalem, that where we get to look at some of the beautiful vineyards over on the hills.
And hazelnuts.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep, and hazelnuts.
So you mentioned kind of enjoying wine and kind of enjoying Pinot Noir. Tell me about sort of learning about wine. We're talking about the education process, learning both about wine and kind of developing your palate over the years.
Mm-hmm.
So we started in 2010 with an amateur wine group the Portland Wine, it's called now the Portland Winemakers Club, but it was the West Side Wine Club at that time. And Dennis could tell you a little more about how we found them. It was kind of an interesting story on finding them.
We were, one of our close friends, we were meeting in downtown Newburg at a facility and had asked if there was somebody we could talk to about making reds, big red wines, because we'd talked about it, the three of us, about making big red wines. And it was something where it was just a happenstance that a nice couple came in at the same time I was asking, and said, hey, would you help us? We bought a bottle and sat down and talked to them for an hour, and they introduced us to a gentleman in that amateur wine club who took us under his wing and has helped us tremendously. He's a good close friend now in that learning process, and with that club it was fantastic. It was we took on the approach of going at it a little bit more than carboys. We started with half barrels and then doubled every year. So that's been our business model. Not because we needed a business model, but just if we were any good at it and we liked it, maybe it would be something fun to do together, in our twilight years here, if you could say that.
Yeah.
Prior to that, our love of wine and was primarily focused on, tasting and supporting the local community, trying to keep up with the growth, visiting the different wineries and talking to them. It was fun to watch Lang come out of his garage and grow, and all the different wineries through the Sokoblosser era when they had the concerts, and to see all the different wineries explode. So making big reds was kind of something we thought that would be fun, and we thought with the weather and the way things are warming up, there was obviously a trend, and the amount of planting around us was increasing in terms of a little bit bigger, more bold reds in this local area. So we thought, well, that would be fun to do. So that's how we did it, and our palates developed. This is always a learning activity, and your palate is, and connecting your brain to what you're tasting and smelling is fun, and kind of the enjoyment that we get out of it. It's a suggestive type of industry, of product, tasting wine, and so it's always learning, and that's the part we love.
So when you got started with the making process, you thought it would be fun. I'm curious about sort of your initial impressions of actually making wine. Was it what you expected, and if not, what was different than you expected?
I had no idea at all, so it was just a learning curve for both of us. But we did a lot of hands-on with some other wineries. So we have this industry is so great where there's people that you can call any other winemaker, and they're so welcome to give you information about making wine or the problem you may have or any question. So we were hands-on with a couple other wineries before we. During that time, we were in the amateur wine group, so that seemed to work out really well.
Helping with the crushing and the bottling, and learning the different stages of the production. Right?
And then lots of reading, lots and lots of reading.
Lots of books.
Yep.
Yep. Yeah, that was a fun. I thought I knew a little bit about how to organize the wineries from a design perspective and how they could go together, but nothing to do with making, the art and the science and the blend of the two. We learned a lot of that from reading and that wine club and the relationships we built there, which we still maintain to this day.
So the focus on big reds from the beginning is an interesting one. I'm curious about when you got started, where were you looking for fruit, and was there a certain type of big red you were looking for?
The amateur wine club actually had contacts for grapes, so we had that ability to buy in bulk. Kind of, everybody was putting their order together, and so that's kind of how we got to know some of the vineyards, and some of them we still work with today. 10 years later, we're still buying from those same vineyards.
What was interesting was we kind of stayed outside of that ordering process with the wine club, only because we thought our order sizes were going to be bigger. We kind of predicted
They started bigger.
needing to have our own relationships with the suppliers and the vineyard owners. So we didn't have our own vineyard at that time. We more recently, in the last 6 years now, have our own little vineyard up on the hill where we can grow Pinot, and which is fun. Yeah, we built relationships from scratch with those different wine growers that are out there. Like coming from California, I had a passion for Zinfandel. That is my go-to wine that I like. We happened to find a supplier who's got grape clippings from a vineyard in Healdsburg, about a mile from where I was raised. He planted in Washington, and so we get our fruit. It's the same fruit that I grew up with. So 34-year-old vines it's fantastic. Yeah.
It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, small world.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty cool.
Besides that, what are the other varietals you've worked with, and are there anything you haven't worked with yet that you're looking forward to?
We do about 15 different varietals each year. 4 whites, 3 to 4 whites, 2 Pinots, and the rest are big reds.
It's quite a few big
And
reds.
in the first 4 or 5 years, we didn't even make a Pinot or a white wine. It was like, this is not what we want to make, but there are people that wanted it, so we kind of changed our grouping there. But we're doing Sangiovese, Tempranillo, Cab Franc, Malbec, Petit Syrah, Syrah, Cab Sauv, Barbera,
Aqua Noir, Zinfandel. So those are the big reds. Nebbiolo is one I'd like to get to if we can get there. But we're pretty maxed out at 3 or 4 tons per varietal is kind of where we're at. We sit at about 3,500 cases a year, which is about our facility and kind of our throughput is just almost just right, almost Goldilocks. But there's always wanting to try a little something different.
Tell me about the space here. You mentioned you put the vineyard in. Obviously, we're in your beautiful tasting room here. Tell me about the evolution of that and of finding customers, especially in the early days as you were getting started.
So our winery is up close to our home, which is on the other side of the property, that we've expanded twice to get to where we're at today. When we first started, got licensed in 2011 to start making wine, we're doing a lot of outside wine events. So the Portland Seafood and Wine Festival, Newport, Astoria, those kind of places, the SIP. We were doing a lot of those type of events to sell our wine. Started building our wine club, and in 2000, what year was it here? 2017, we started talking about doing a tasting room. And
2016, we won the Best of the Bite of Oregon Pinot Noir.
Which was weird since we specialized in the big reds, but hey, we were going to take it.
It's a big Pinot, right? So it kind of comes out like big reds. So at that time, the judges liked that one. That's when we determined, maybe this hitting the road and the road show is a little overwhelming. It's a lot of work. And we had this part of the property, and that's when we decided, let's take a look. I think it was Marlene's idea. Why don't we take a look at putting a tasting room down here? And that's when we came down and decided to work on putting a tasting room in and see what that's about, and then get the design going and build it. So we've been here 2.5 years, this tasting room. We have a pretty good capacity.
We had a friend that was a retired architect that did the concept on the building. Dennis did most of the design he built all the bar and did a lot of the design on the building, which is kind of cool too. A lot of the wood that you find on our property, maple, cedar, and fir, we used here in the building. So the trees we took down, we had a guy out of Newburg mill the wood, and One 140-foot cedar tree that we did off one side of the property. He milled that we sided the whole outside of the building with. There's a bar, the first bar that you come in is part of that cedar tree. And then the tree in the middle of the building is the top 28 feet of that tree. Yeah.
Yeah, that cedar gave its all.
And the Parrett Mountain sign in the front of the building, the base of that sign is the base of that cedar tree. Yeah, and then the fir and the maple we used on both wrapping trusses and posts in the building and bars and our mantle. So it was kind of cool to incorporate that wood in the building.
Sustainable. That was our sustainable contribution. That, and we built our subterranean case storage area, right? So it doesn't require any additional cooling, so we just use the ground to keep it cool, which makes sense.
You talked about one of the things that was important to you was building those relationships with vineyards individually, or as a group here. Tell me about what you were looking for in a vineyard relationship and how you do go about building something like that from scratch.
Well, good question. The handshake relationship, it's like Marlene said, it's a great industry. We have 7 relationships basically every year that we've had for 7 or 8 years now, and of different vineyards. For all those varietals Marlene described, we have a number of them, half in Oregon, maybe more than half, 5 of them in Oregon and a couple in the Columbia Valley. And they're all personal, same folks we've dealt with from day one kind of relationships, where comes April, we start talking about our next, what we're thinking of purchasing, and very few contracts. We might have one contract, and it's just one of the suppliers. We cut 20 tons of grapes, and it's a handshake. So that's been fun. Everybody allows us the opportunity to help decide and determine when we'd like to have the grapes picked, and that's, they almost know better than we do. Of course, we're not the farmers, right? So we work with them. So that relationship requires a bit of trust, right? So that we're getting the quality of grapes from them that we'd like to have, and the timing of it is always fun. One year we had them all come in pretty close to the same time, so we're pretty busy. So of course we scaled after that for the following year, improving our equipment a little bit. So it was
and borrowing from other wineries, like, hey, do you have a couple extra totes we could borrow, or whatever?
And wine club members. We created a club early on in 13 or so, and having folks come volunteer a little bit is how we started, which is a blast. Folks love it, love to see it and come out and help. Yeah, so balancing the growth with the demand, keeping our supply and our demand. We're a 2-year process for our reds. We keep it in barrel for 2 years. We find that's kind of the sweet spot for the style of wines we make. We try and hit 20-25% oak, new oak. That's where we are. So, and then every year we learn a little bit more and more about how to improve. But we've tried to hold those varietals, I think, pretty constant. The ones, right, for the last 4 years we've had those. And sometimes, a year might be such that it's not a great crop. Last year we had some issues with the Pinot, of course, in the valley. It was down, the production. And so, you go with the flow. You never know what varietal might sell out first or second, or...
And we've always done whole varietal, so we weren't doing red blends at all until just a few years ago.
Yeah.
So you could always count on getting 100% Cab Franc or Barbera or whatever it is. In the last few years, our blends have been very popular, so each year now we're doing one red blend. And our wine club members are waiting for it. Yeah.
That was part of our strategy, was to hone our technique and how we were making our wines to try and improve our quality on the individual varietals. So if you get too crazy and starting to blend too early, we were worried that we wouldn't really track what and how we were making each of our varietals, and so we got that a little bit stable, and then we've probably made a couple of blends so far too.
Yeah.
We're getting ready to do our third one here shortly, so that's fun.
Makes sense, like that.
And we've done things like fermented them separately and then co-fermented to see how that is going to change the flavor profile, and so just learning.
You were a little ahead of the curve on the kind of the big red trend, I think, in Oregon. I'm curious about, especially early on, what was the consumer reaction to your wines and to your kind of brand identity, I guess?
Yeah, it didn't take long.
It didn't at all.
It was a lot faster than our ability to name ourselves. Coming up with a name for our, we went round and round of our last names and our first names and the kids' names, and we did that whole game for a year or two. Just thinking about it, right? And then it was like, well, our identity is kind of a little bit more where we're located, and that's why we did Parrett Mountain Cellars, because having a tasting room and a winery up in the trees, you know, it's not as obvious as being out in a vineyard area, and we predicted the growth on the hill and in surrounding areas. So,
and doing big reds in Pinot country, I mean, there are people that just are, you know, they like the Pinot but can really go for that Cab Franc, and they were having to drive to Hood River to get it.
Yeah.
So,
and there was a 7-year cycle. We identified some trends that come from Northern California or Southern California. It takes a while for the cycles to move around. I watched it move from Napa to Sonoma to Paso Robles and Amador County, and they kind of move around, and so you track some of those. And so that's why we didn't open up, that's another reason why we didn't open up blends too soon. It was like, let's wait and get folks accustomed to the big red stuff, and then and you're right, when we started there weren't many big reds out here, and we knew that. And it's fun to work with them.
Yeah, we made what we like to drink. So, you know, if there's a varietal that we're not making, it's because it's not really one that we prefer to have ourselves. So what we have here are our favorites.
Yeah. We also weren't sure if we were going to tick off all of the Pinot makers in the area. So we don't make Pinot because we don't want to tick them off. We do like Pinot Noir. That's why we're trying to grow it here at altitude. The warmer weather's allowed our little vineyard to produce nicely, but we're at about 1,000 feet on a north-facing slope, so it's a bit challenging. But we'll have another. This year we had, I think we had a limited production of rosé that we did off of our vineyard. We'll do another rosé this year, maybe, or maybe we'll do some Pinot. I don't know. Wait and see how the grapes come out. Yeah.
After a long time as wine consumers, I'm curious about, once you had something in bottle to present to consumers, how do you handle the reaction from someone when it's finally your name on the bottle or your brand on the bottle? How did you handle when people didn't like it, or when people had questions for you that were strange? I'm curious about, from that perspective, after so long drinking wine, what was it like having the product?
Well, I think everybody has their own flavor palette. I mean, there's some wines I don't like, and I can tell them everything about that wine because we've made the wine. You know, we're the winemakers, which I think people appreciate, because a lot of times they go into a tasting room and never see the owner nor the winemaker, and we're here every day. So, and we were then too. We were the ones selling the wine. We didn't have a staff selling the wine. We were selling it. So I just think people that are going to either like it or not for their own reasons. We would never sell a wine that we wouldn't drink. So it would never have been, you know, in a glass for a consumer to taste.
Surprisingly, we didn't have that many boo-boos along the way. I mean, you
We
know, when you're
really
making,
didn't. It was
we didn't make
surprising.
many boo-boos. We had a Sangiovese back in 2013 or 12 or 13 or something that went sideways on us a little bit, you know, and that wasn't good.
It wasn't that much though, because at that time we weren't making, you know, 600 gallons of it, so
Yeah.
it wasn't that bad. But
But that's been about it. We've been careful. And we spend a lot of time in our process to be careful as we're making our wine, sanitation and cleanliness. We spend a lot of effort on that. And frankly, thanks to our mentor who helped us, taught us that in his winemaking.
yeah,
So we've adopted some of those types of techniques to make sure we don't introduce any kind of issues into the process. But people, for the most part, I'm trying to think of how many times I've had somebody go wrinkle their nose and go, I don't like that. Probably 5 times in the
it doesn't hurt our
7 or
feelings
8
at all,
years.
like I said.
It's not very many
Yeah.
times. So that's an interesting one. More often than not, people, I really like that one, you know.
Yeah.
And
They
it's-
like it, they just don't like it as much as they like something else.
Yeah.
It's like a dry wine or a sweet wine. I mean, you know, people like dry wines, don't like sweet wines.
Yeah. Most of what we make are dry. We have a little bit sweeter on the white side. We'll have one that's a little off dry, usually.
So you mentioned your process there. Tell me a little bit about the sort of the winemaking process and style here and the sort of philosophy behind it. What do you want the wines to represent?
Well, I think the number one thing is for the varietals to stand on their own, to represent the fruit the best way we can, right? We've all heard you can't do anything but screw up the fruit from the time it's picked, and that's true. So we spend a fair amount of time trying to make our wines exactly represent the grape itself. And if the wine represents the grape itself, then it's easy for us to target the characteristics that we're familiar with now that we've created some of the trends. We kind of know what we would like to have from the wine. Higher acid wines like Barbera and Malbec, and even some of the Syrah, they have a little higher acid, and that's normal. We would expect the more mouthfeel in the Zins and Cabs and Cab Francs and Cab Sauv. Petite Syrah is just going to make your teeth purple, and that's just going to be how it is. So the different styles of wines is what we push for, trying to get the kind of the style that we like. I mentioned the oak profile. We find that to be, we didn't believe that people could identify the different oak barrels that were used in the winemaking process when we first started going to the amateur wine club. A couple of gentlemen there that were phenomenal, right? And would during the paper bag wine tasting, when we do comparisons, they could identify that it was a certain French oak barrel. I didn't believe that. I can believe it now.
Even the varietal,
Yeah.
the residual sugar. I mean, there's a lot of factors that
Yeah.
these guys could.
We learned a lot
We've learned a lot from that.
But getting to where you can identify an oak barrel, the type of oak and how much oak through just tasting a wine, that's phenomenal. So we enjoyed that.
And I think the reason the 25% oak or less too is because we want the fruit to shine through and not
Yeah.
to have a whole bunch of oak from the nose to the flavors that you're getting
Yeah.
from that varietal.
And the big reds tend to handle it. The more mature reds handle a bit more oak. So it's fun.
I assume with some of you're running into some consumers who are unfamiliar with some or many of your varietals, or at least unfamiliar with what they're supposed to taste like. Tell me about your role as consumer educators here and how that has evolved as your education has evolved.
We do on all of our tasting information, we always kind of give a description of, you know, what the description is of that wine. And then we just like to talk about what we get from it. The notes that we have here are flavors that we get and that from the wine rather than, you know, the book, because they're all different. Yeah.
Yeah, so we go through every year and write up our tasting notes for each of the wines as we get them bottled, which is fun because that means we get to taste everything after we bottle them. It's the best part, quality control. And some years are a little different just because the grape comes out a little different, whether it's drier or warmer weather or more water or less water, or lots of factors. That's what we've noticed, I think, in this whole winemaking process is how many variables there are. Seriously, it's one person's, I mean, look at all the Pinot Noirs that are so different. And so that's been fun, learning that. Teaching folks, having them pronounce Sangiovese.
Or Tempranillo.
Or Tempranillo. We get, it's fun. And interacting with people is probably the best. That's the most enjoyment. Marlene's very good at it and loves it. I do too. And our staff are good at it. And
great staff.
And people tend to appreciate that in talking about and explaining, but leaving them alone and giving them privacy.
Yeah, I think one of the experiences that we have found just by going out to other wineries is it's either a wine experience where you want to hear all that information, and there's other times when you're right in the middle of a conversation with your friends, and then you get interrupted by somebody that wants to tell you about the next wine. We don't do that. So we give all the information to the guests with all their tasting flight at one time, and then just go over everything at the beginning, and then kind of walk away and let them enjoy their friends and the wine and the experience with the information we've given them all written, and then just pop by every once in a while to see, do you have any questions about the wines? Mm-hmm. No, and then walk away. So it's more of a enjoyment rather than being interrupted and or waiting for the wine to here's your taste, and then 20 minutes later you get the next one. We provide the wine all at one time, so that they can do it at their own pace. Mm-hmm. And I
love it because I get to kind of flutter in whenever I want, kind of walk through, and somebody will ask me to come over and talk to them, wine club member or somebody, and so that is a little more for us. That's
and the
perfect.
Guests, we've asked the guests, and they do prefer it that way. Mm-hmm. So I think
that's what we do.
That's what we're doing.
But it is a people business. That's fun.
So you mentioned the kind of the process of designing the tasting room here. I'm curious with it, what options has that given you in terms of use of this space, and what, as you look forward with the space, what do you hope to do with it in the future?
Well, we use the space not just for tasting room, but for private events. So we've done weddings and receptions and birthdays and that kind of thing. It's been, we're kind of selective on that too. I mean, we don't book it out every night or every weekend.
We've had fantastic support from local industries who've had, dinners and recurring type dinners and things. So that's been fun to build those relationships with the businesses. And that was always the plan, to have it be able to use it and let people enjoy it. We've developed the outside area, of course, with the COVID. The building always had some, from the beginning, initial design from our initial designer who was great in putting the facility's style together, was kind of set up for being separated. And so having a fair amount of outside seating and space allowed us to kind of get through the whole issue with the pandemic.
It saved us.
Yeah.
It really saved us.
And then adding outside space and just leveraging both. for us has been good. Parking, we had to expand our parking area just because, as not having reservations as a requirement. In the summer we get pretty full, so we can handle up to about 50 vehicles, and that's about the limit. We've kind of pushed everywhere, and we'll be paving.
Without taking out another tree.
I think we're going to pave the parking lot in a couple of weeks, so that'll help with the folks with the fancy cars that come up.
It's part of the joy of wine country, though.
Yes.
You gotta have gravel roads to some degree.
Well, yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
You just don't want them to have to get stuck coming up the hill spinning out on the gravel. Yeah.
So as you've grown, I'm curious. In addition to direct-to-consumer stuff, how else do you market now that you're not doing events as much, or not doing outside events as much anymore? How have you marketed, and how have you seen the brand grow over the years?
I think not too much marketing other than what we do with, emails, and it's pretty much word of mouth. I mean, we get a lot of wine club members that bring friends, and they join, or they come back and bring more friends. So it's been more word of mouth than anything. And we occasionally will submit some of our wines to wine competitions, and then people hear from us on that. Another thing too is there's a lot of great wineries around us that refer us, because somebody will mention, gosh, I'd sure like to taste a Cab Sauv. Oh, go over to Parrett Mountain. And we do, reciprocate with that too. We're always referring people to other wineries in the area. So that's kind of how we market ourselves.
And it hasn't been a blitz. It hasn't been using outside distributors because of our growth model. It's been a steady growth curve, and we don't want to get so big because, frankly, we have a facility and a location here that we have a maximum capacity, and so we're not quite there yet, but we're on our way there. So Marlene's done a great job with the wine club in growing that.
And we sell all our wine right here. If it's not from wine club, it's in the tasting room.
Yeah.
There's only a couple local restaurants that even have our wine in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the pandemic. I want to ask about 2020 a little bit. So just curious about sort of the initial response to and effect from last year, from last March, and the COVID shutdown, and sort of how you did pivot last year to make last year work, and as you're coming out of it, what you see for the sort of the immediate future here.
Our wine club members really supported us during that time.
That's the number one
especially
thing.
when we were closed. People were sitting at home wanting a glass of wine, and so we were selling a lot of wine even though we weren't open.
Drive up.
Yeah.
It was amazing. We posted to our folks, we'll be happy to set up a drive up, and so we adapted to that. And everybody, it was amazing how supportive folks were.
Yeah, our numbers are good this year, and we're growing. People like that we don't take reservations, where most of the valley, they are taking reservations.
We did during the pandemic, we did.
For like 2 months, just because we were down to that high risk or extreme risk. Where we only had 5 tables on the patio kind of thing. We had to pivot that way, but we don't take reservations anymore. And it's made a big difference. People want to walk in. They don't want to have to know that they have to be somewhere at a certain time. So I think that was, and we're growing. People like it here. They like all the outdoor area. So even if they're uncomfortable with COVID, they could be out there and be on their own.
You also mentioned sort of the other issue of 2020, the fires last harvest. Tell me about how that affected you and how you handle it at the moment.
Well, I mentioned we made some rosé from our Pinot up on the hill. One of those kinds of things. We made a white Pinot as well, with some of the Pinot Noir that had been tainted, to keep it off the skins. And so, for the most part, because Pinot Noir represents about 4 of our wines, it impacted us primarily on the Pinot Noir side, not on the white Pinot and the Rosé side. So we had a reduced production because of it. And other than that, our Rogue grapes, we have our Baca Noir and Tempranillo out of the Rogue Valley. They came out fine. They came out, different vineyards did different things during the course of the fires, and so we did fine with it.
And Pinot's one of the, we make a really nice Pinot, but we sell more big reds. So, you know, it's not one that we have to make every year.
We got our Pinot grapes last year. We got some grapes from one of our Pinot suppliers that it's superb. It's as good as 19, or maybe a little better, in terms of how the grapes came out. And his hillside, open at the top and open at the bottom on the hill, out towards Carlton, to where he always has a bit of airflow. He didn't have any smoke taint issues, and this is out towards Carlton, and so it was amazing. So that was a blessing for us, because we got some great fruit from him. Yeah.
From your perspective, I'm curious, what were the biggest impacts you saw to the industry in Oregon from 2020? How was it impacted, and how has it adjusted and evolved?
I think, I'm not sure about industry, you know, other than we noticed a lot of grapes being dropped or not picked. What affected us is we do, you know, those large wine events that we couldn't do. Actually, some of them we haven't done now for 2 years. We sell a lot of wine at those wine events. And so those impacted us not being able to do,
as well as special
5
events.
of them. And special events, yeah, canceling all those weddings and parties and stuff.
Yeah,
really
that
affected
was quite a bit of impact. But the industry as a whole, rode through a lot of helping, folks helping other folks. We made more wine than we wanted to make because there was grapes available, you know. So it was like, well, we'll try and help you out. So we did some of that. The issue of having staff available, that's been...
That was tough to have to not have our staff working too.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure everybody else had that same issue.
Yeah, not having them work.
And now we can't find staff. That's another,
Yeah.
that's another story.
But the fires of 2020 is also, you know, we're working on getting a generator so that our well that's 650 feet deep, we can keep it running if we do lose power. We were hit on this hill with that power issue that occurred with this last February storm. And so for living in the trees, we got to worry about fire and such. So we put metal roof on the building, and we've got an exterior sprinkler system going in that will help take care of the building from the outside, all that kind of stuff.
Living and learning, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Every day it's
Yeah.
another thing.
Yeah.
So since you've been a part of the Oregon wine industry, or since your sort of first impressions of Oregon wine, what are the biggest changes you've seen in the industry? What's different now than when you came into the industry?
Number of wineries doubled.
Yeah.
We were part of that. It was interesting to
And
observe.
more wineries doing big reds in the area now that
Yeah.
weren't in the past.
But then the recognition of fantastic wines from the big winemakers, supporting international competitions, right? That's been fantastic. And tourism. I don't know how that's going to be going forward, but hopefully it's maintained. So I think that's something we observed, was the growth of some of the larger wineries helping to spin off the whole economy of winemaking, because it's good for us to have other have others making big reds, and it's good for us having the big guys and little guys entering competitions and taking home the gold, you know. So that's a good thing. And yeah, we noticed. I think we went to a year and a half ago at one of the expositions we went to, Wine Learnings in Portland. I can't remember the name of that.
The Wine Symposium?
Wine Symposium. And one of the speakers was showing some of the graphs of production in the United States. And Oregon was the only one on the positive side growing. And it was phenomenal. We saw the decline in California, and just about all the other states had some level or decline. So that was fun to see. And I think there was true spin-off of some of the notoriety that came from some of the big competitions.
So what about as you look ahead for Oregon? What is the industry going to look like in the coming years? What are the changes you're excited for, and is there anything you're concerned about?
I don't know.
My concern is around the reaction to Portland as a center of the state, and what it might do as it relates to whether or not folks fly into the area, because we always get referred to as being in the Portland area, even out here, and there's such a huge need for having a positive a draw from going to Portland. It's been for the last 10 years or 20 years, it's been foodie, beer, wine, whiskey, whatever is popular at the time. It's been a magnet, and I see that has changed. And I'm worried that's a concern. I think growth out here, it feels like we've talked about the growth is now a little more maturing of those that are in already, kind of working their models and either expanding their businesses or and how they're marketing internationally or worldwide or U.S. So there's a maturing that's coming. Now you could say that a lot of them have already matured, and maybe they're going through a second phase of maturity, I imagine.
Well, what about for you? What's next for you? What are your sort of hopes for the future here, and what are anything exciting on the horizon in terms of projects or varietals here?
We've done pretty much all the projects that I can think of. It's been a 3-year process.
We're doing another one.
Yeah, it's been a 3-year process of all these different projects, and so yeah.
I'm always the project guy.
Yeah, he's the project
guy. We're going to do a White's Room. We're doing an expansion to create a specific
to the winery.
To the winery, a White's Room.
Not to the tasting room.
I know, but it's part of it.
Yeah.
It's always this. We work well together that way. As an organic growth model, you have to decide when you're going to pull the trigger on something, and that's what we've been doing. It's kind of fun because you got to stay ahead for the big reds, a couple of years, 2 or 3 years ahead. But we're looking out 5 years. So different varietals, working with one vineyard owner who we're talking to, planting specific varietals for us that we can target. Because we'd love to have an offering of a wine that nobody else has, that kind of thing. Don't have to, but it'd be fun. So we've been trying to, as part of our growth, continue to offer something unique and different. And so we'll continue with that, I think. Does that sound right?
Yeah, sounds great.
Well, that actually leads me to my next question, because you mentioned working well together. I'm curious about successful marriage when you're also business owners together and running this kind of operation. Tell me about how you've made it work, and what your kind of tips are for others who might want to try it.
So I'll answer that one.
This is part of the tip. Let her answer sometimes. Stop
We do
talking.
really well at each doing our own thing. I mean, I have things that I do during the winemaking process. Dennis has things that he does. The same with the tasting room and kind of just the way we run the business. And it works well that way, but we always collaborate on anything we're going to do, and then we do our own, you know, we have jobs to
And
do.
then I just say yes, and she does what
and
you
that's
want.
true too. That's a good thing. But that's kind of the process, and it works well. I think that works
does,
great to kind of know what my job is and what Dennis's job is, and it's been successful because we've got a successful tasting room, a great wine club. We make great wines, and people seem to love us and our staff, which has been very successful. Tasting room.
We started, I agree with you 100%, we started it as a hobby to do together, and that was intentional. And we started it with another gentleman, a friend of ours, who we still interact with and work together with. And it's just fun, absolutely fun.
Yeah, we really enjoy what we're doing.
Yeah, and all the people that we get to meet, and mutual friends. So we've got lots of good friends, new friends. When you live out in the country, you know, we're out in the sticks, literally, and so having relationships where you can go have dinner with somebody and all that is important. We raised 2 children living out here, both of which were engaged in the winery and in the tasting room. It's fascinating. So that's been fun as well. Right? My first wife right here. She hates that.
When you talk about the roles that you have, I'm curious, was that something that you went into with an idea of what you were going to do, or is that something that sort of evolved as the business has evolved, and what each of your roles was going to be?
It pretty much evolved,
Yeah, it
I think.
evolved.
Yeah.
It evolved.
I mean, I always knew that I was going to be mostly the part of the tasting room. Dennis also has another business too, so, you know, but our job titles have always, you know, what we've done have always been kind of evolved, that he does this better and I do this better.
Boss and janitor.
Come on. Yeah. So it's worked out really well.
Yeah. The winemaking, you know, when we started, we were crushing the grapes with a little, you know, hand crusher. We had a hand crank crusher.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's how you start. And the press was a little squeezy press, the little, and so
Basket press.
Basket press. And so we got our hands dirty, did a lot of reading and worked on the stuff and migrated towards what we like to do, right? And strengths and weaknesses, and did what we felt we're comfortable with. But we both could back each other up with anything, which is a kind of important for us, I think, except some things.
Well, you mentioned also your children being involved in the business, and I'm curious, as you look ahead, is the hope this being a multi-generational project?
You know, I don't know whether our daughters will, I mean,
But when they watch this, they'll say, why didn't you say
yeah.
absolutely?
Yeah.
What? We haven't even got there yet. So.
I could see them, you know, doing the tasting room,
want.
whether they do the winemaking or not. We might, you know, they may want to have a winemaker. But for the tasting room, I could see them wanting to keep this and keep it going.
Yeah.
And one of our daughters works here almost full time, so she runs the tasting room, and she knows all the facets of running this tasting room. So I'm sure she would be one that would want to keep it going.
Well, I'm not going anywhere for a while.
No, I'm not either.
We figure we got another 20 years at it. Right?
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe more.
Pretty good for a little hobby you wanted to start together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hobby that got out of control. That's what I tell people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, it's fun.
That's actually all the questions that I have for you. Is there anything I didn't ask that I should have? Anything we didn't cover here that we should have covered?
I can't think of any.
No.
You were pretty thorough.
Yeah. Thank
You're
you very
very
much
thorough.
for having us.
Well, thank you so
Thank you
much
both.
for your time today and for your hospitality and showing off this beautiful space. And I'll go ahead and let you off the hook.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
You.